Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Aaron Fallouse, founder and CEO of Promotable, and also, of course, founder of Breaking Into Data. So welcome, everyone. I know there's a lot of other places you can be and a lot of other webinars and things like this to go see. So appreciate you guys spending the time with us. If you get a minute, we'll be sending out a survey after this. We'd love to just learn a little bit more about why everyone comes to these, what you guys want to learn, who you want to hear from, so we can just come back and continue to bring in really top-notch speakers. Other thing to note, I'm sure all of you who've seen or come to our events before, you've noticed we're using a different platform. We really want to get back to being interactive, being able to course, network and meet other people, but really ask questions and not just post them in the chat. Of course, feel free to continue doing posting things in the chat, but also after we finish the main chat, we'll open it up for Q&A. And basically, everyone who wants to have a question, let me know, drop it in the chat. I'll invite you to the stage, and you'll be able to have your camera on, look just like me, nice and pretty, and ask the question, really have that conversation. And you've also noticed that we have a lounge with tables. I'll be hanging out after the event as well. If anyone wants to come and say hello and ask me questions or what have you, happy to do that. You all can also do that as well with each other. So feel free. Apologize for the longer intro than usual, but want to make sure that everyone knows about all the new features. Going forward, we will be using this tool because it'll just make for a much better experience. So with that said, last thing, so Promotable. So we have events, obviously, our goal here is to help everyone level up on the data side, get data skills, learn from practitioners who do this every single day. So today we have Al. This is going to be a really cool event. I know if you guys are like me, I had everything in Google Sheets. I was that person. I was an operations guy. So if you all feel that pain, I think this will be something that you'll learn a lot from. Definitely get your questions ready, as we'll run through them all. Next week, we also have a data-driven marketing event. So for all the marketers in the room, that'll be interesting. And then also in January, we've got a big lineup of people as well. So definitely look at that. And also, lastly, for anyone who wants to dive deeper into data, go beyond a couple of webinars, and you want to take a full-on course, Promotable offers those as well. We've got the next one starting January 12th. So we go through things like SQL, Tableau, Python, learn how to really ask that business question and dive deeper, all taught by practitioners like our guest speakers. And we also pair you with mentors as well. That's 5 hours a week for a total of 8 weeks. Feel free to come ask me a question or have you just come say hello. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Al and take it away.
Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everyone. My name is Al Chen. I'm a solutions architect at Coda. And today I'm going to be talking about how I learned Google Apps Script, which is like this kind of scripting tool that Google provides for free, and how I was able to connect it with Google Sheets and also Coda. And today I really want to make this less about where I work Coda, but more about my kind of journey learning about Google Apps Script, how I connected with Google Sheets, and things along those lines, and how to connect my data sources together. Some quick background about myself. Actually, I'll just go ahead and share my screen right now. I am a self-taught Excel enthusiast / analyst, and I used to be a financial analyst at Google for 5+ years, and that's pretty much where I learned most of my Excel skills. I knew nothing, very, very little about Excel before I started my first role at Google. After Google, I kind of did some freelancing on my own, and that was mostly building Excel models, Excel tools, Google Sheets tools for my clients. And then in early 2018, I joined Coda, which is kind of a platform that mixes spreadsheets, docs, and databases together. I've done a lot of teaching throughout my career as well. I have a few Excel classes on Skillshare, and I've reached over 30,000 students on that online learning platform. And I've also been blogging and doing a podcast and newsletter about Excel since 2012. And I have a LinkedIn newsletter that reaches 7,000 analysts or so. And so, yeah, my passion and my work has always centered around data analysis, and thinking about how to better connect our data sources together and to tell really interesting data stories so that we can help make business decisions at our organizations. And yeah, I'll just leave that intro at that, and I'll also try to join the lounge afterwards if you have any more questions about me and the projects I've worked on in the past. So before I get into Google Apps Script, I kind of want to walk you through my little journey first with VBA. So for those of you who are not familiar with VBA, VBA is pretty old. It's been around since I think the early 90s, and it stands for Visual Basic for Applications, I believe. And I stumbled across VBA when I was a financial analyst at Google. One of the things I had to do at Google as a financial analyst was create these monthly reports. And I was doing probably close to 150 per month for different business units within Google's engineering organization. And it was the same report. It was like, what are the expenses? What is the headcount? And all these things. And I would put this all in Excel, plop it into PowerPoint, and then I would do that 150 times a month, just like pressing on the mouse and keyboard and stuff like that. And I was like, there must be a better way to do this. And I realized I could automate a lot of stuff using VBA. And so VBA is a way to basically automate all these steps in terms of copying and pasting, applying formatting, moving data around your spreadsheet in Excel. And I realized that I could basically automate my entire job of creating 150 cost center reports every month with the click of a button. And that's what I did. I wrote this little script, and I basically did my job that usually took like a week full-time of work, and I was able to do it within like 5 minutes. And I never told my manager. He just assumed that I was doing this, the work of creating these slides every month. But in reality, I was just pressing this button, and it would just output all my reports for me. So I started with VBA, and this was actually a real client project I worked on as a freelancer, which was, my client was an addiction recovery center based in Texas, and they had this patient intake spreadsheet which collected people from an online form. So these are people who want to go to this addiction recovery center, and what they would do is put all the names, and you can see in this list here, the names of the people, the referral source, the application date. They put this all in one spreadsheet, and then they would copy and paste those names to a different spreadsheet in the same file, depending on if the person was accepted, what quote unquote house they would live in when they got accepted into the recovery center, so on and so forth. And so what I did was I put these two little buttons at the top, and all these buttons did was you click on it, and then the VBA macro, they're called these automated scripts called macros. It would just automatically copy and paste the data from one spreadsheet into another one, depending on these rules that I wrote into the script. And that's what this, I'll zoom in a little bit. You can't really see too much of the script here, but that's what this thing on the right is of the screen. This is the script, and it would just simply copy and paste data from one spreadsheet to another, depending on how I set up the rules. And I didn't know anything about VBA. I was just Googling the whole time, trying to figure out how you can make this script actually work. And then once I learned how to do one simple thing like copy and paste, then I thought, well, maybe I can actually have this thing create a PowerPoint file for me. Maybe I can have that actually create charts for me. And that's what I was doing with VBA. And this led me to the second thing, which is the spreadsheet interface versus the data model. So for those of you who are new to macros, what happens is when you record a macro, this is in Excel, what you're doing is literally you're clicking on cells, typing in words or numbers, copy and pasting, and the macro records all those individual steps that you want to automate. And so it's kind of like recording, recording a song, we're recording a podcast, you're just trying to record all these different things and have that replay over and over again when you are faced with the same task. And what's happening behind the scenes when you're recording things is this. So you notice that in this macro here, you'll see it says range A1, A6.select. This is actually telling in Excel world, this is telling Excel, put your cursor around cells A1 to A6 and select those cells. That's literally what that first line says, range A1, A6, select. And then with selection, apply horizontal alignment, wrap the text. So these are all individual settings that you would apply to the range. And so you can see how you can turn the things you would do with your mouse in the cells in Excel into these kind of instructions in the macro. And when you record the macro, all of these instructions get put into the VBA like automatically. You're not writing all these instructions by hand, which is really nice. The problem is I realized that when you're recording the macro like this, this is the recording a macro in Google Sheets. It's actually very inefficient because imagine you have a sheet that has like 1 million rows or 500,000 rows. And if you're moving the cursor from one cell to another cell, copy and pasting, that can actually be really slow over time when you're working with many, many rows of data. And in today's world, we're always working with like big data, tons of rows. So it ends up being pretty inefficient. And so what I discovered is that instead of working with the interface of selecting cells A1 through A6, the better way of doing this is storing the data into the data model in Google Sheets or Excel, and you are working with objects in the backend instead of working with like the interface, which is Excel or Google Sheets. I know it's kind of like a difficult concept to understand if you're new to working with macros or VBA, but one key takeaway is that you want to think about not using the selection of the cells and putting data into cells, but rather using the backend data model, which I'll talk about in a bit. So over my years as a freelancer and still today when I'm using Google Sheets, I realized that you can access a Google Sheet data, the data in the cells of the Google Sheets using the Google Sheets API. And this is what the API resource looks like. There's a link to this if you want all the links to this presentation. But a simple way to connect to the Google Sheets API is using Google Apps Script. Google Apps Script gives you a really simple way to access all the data, all the cells and rows and columns in your Google Sheets in a very automated programmatic way, just like you would use VBA. So I would say Google Apps Script is kind of like the VBA for Excel. And the syntax is very JavaScript-y like language. So you can do things like var params equals JSON stringify and var is variable. And all this stuff is probably familiar to those of you out there who have a little bit of JavaScript experience. And one thing I learned really quickly about Google Apps Script is that it's super easy to learn because there are really easy tutorials like this one from, I forgot the name of this woman, but she is kind of like the main evangelist for Google Apps Script at Google. And I just watched a bunch of these tutorials and realized, hey, I could probably do something cool with Google Apps Script that you can't do natively in Google Sheets. So that goes on to the next problem I was trying to solve, which is I want to sync data from Coda, which is where I work, into Google Sheets. So just quickly go over what Coda is. This is like a simple Coda doc. This is a table in Coda. It looks really similar to Google Sheets. You can have like drop downs and you can have these date fields. The big difference about Google Sheets and Coda is that you can have like text mix in with your table of data. So my basic thing is I have data that's trapped perhaps in Coda, and I want to give that data to someone else in Google Sheets because only they can use Google Sheets for whatever reason. And I want the table, and this is the table in Coda, to look like this in Google Sheets. So basically like a one-to-one like mirror image. And how would I do this without doing a copy and paste every single time I want to update that Google Sheets? So some requirements I thought about was when I get new rows added to my Coda table, this is this table right here, it would show up in Google Sheets, which is this screenshot right here. When I delete rows in a Coda table, they also get deleted in Google Sheets. When I edit existing rows in my Coda table, they get edited in Google Sheets. So really I just want everything to be in sync real time. I don't want any kind of, well, the Coda table has 100 rows, but Google Sheets has 50. Don't want any of that. I want everything to be perfectly matched together. So now I started looking at the Coda API. So just like Google Sheets, Coda also has an API to allow you to access your data in a programmatic way without having to go through the user interface. And just started exploring a little bit. We also have some tutorials on how to use the API. And I also made a tutorial how to do this from beginning to end if anyone's interested. And so I just now began my journey on working in Google Apps Script. And I found out that Google Apps Script has something called Spreadsheet app. And that became really my go-to like object or resource in Google Apps Script to access anything within my Google Sheets that I wanted to. So for instance, if you look at this first line right here, this is pulling from the Google Sheets documentation. Spreadsheet.app.getActiveSpreadsheet. This will basically select whatever sheet you have open in Google Sheets. That's literally all it does. This one right here, sheet equals ss.getSheets0. This simply just pulls in the first sheet in your Google Sheets file. Sheet.deleteRow, that just deletes the first row in your Google Sheet. So imagine going into your Google Sheet, clicking your mouse on the first row, right-clicking, pressing delete. That's what this script basically does in an automated fashion. And the Spreadsheet app resource has a bunch of these functions like delete row, add row, modify row to allow you to move data in and around Google Sheets in a much faster way. And the first thing I did with writing this app script is putting in a bunch of variables. So I need to give the script like, what is my Coda doc ID? What is the table ID? What is my Google Sheets ID? All this stuff goes here. And then the rest of the time was actually spent, if some of you are used to working with databases or working, I guess, even in Excel, is just transforming data into the format that Google Sheets and Coda need in order for everything to sync correctly. So for instance, this, believe it or not, if I'm where my first arrow is pointed at, this is an object that contains all the rows in my Coda doc. And each of these numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is a row. But then each of these values like ID, type, name, index, these are all different columns in my table in Coda. So just from looking at this, you're like, how does this look like anything like a spreadsheet at all? A spreadsheet's supposed to be rows and columns. But when you're working with Google Apps Script, you have to get used to thinking about your data as being kind of stored in like this kind of format where it's almost like a nested type of format. And each row shows all the columns of data along the rows instead of like the columns which you're used to. And so once you get over that hurdle, it became much easier to figure out how to transform data between my Coda table and my Google Sheets table. In Coda, for instance, this is the documentation on the API. These are all individual columns, again, stored within one row of data, but it just doesn't look like what you'd expect a spreadsheet to look like. And I think for a lot of people who are new to Google Sheets or to Google Apps Script, this is probably the biggest barrier to get over, is it doesn't look like a spreadsheet, but in reality, when you look at this, you'll start seeing patterns with like how your data is structured behind the scenes in Google Apps Script. And this took a lot of time for me to get used to, but once I did, I realized this is just the data in my spreadsheet, or this is just the data in my table in Coda. There's nothing special about this. There's nothing, I don't have to be a computer scientist programmer to learn what this means. It's just, these are columns of data in my table. This is one row of data in my table, just visualized in a different way. Some other things I had to think about were how to push data into Google Sheets once I pulled the data out of my table. So for instance, in Google Sheets, using the API, you have to, if I wanted to add these three values of data to three columns in my row, I have to put them within brackets. And then I have to put this within another bracket, which shows an array of data. So this is where also I think a lot of newcomers to Google Apps Script can get tripped up, is the syntax is a little tricky. But once you get learn these patterns, it becomes very easy to build this out in a scalable way. And then finally, we a lot of what we call helper functions. So I found that I was doing the same thing even within Google Apps Script. I remember how earlier I was talking about how I was doing reports in Excel, 150 of them every single month. I was doing the same thing over and over again. I realized in Google Apps Script, I was doing the same thing over and over again as well, transforming data in different ways. So I wrote these simple app scripts functions to help me convert data faster. So I could reuse these functions whenever I had a need to convert a Coda table row to this format, which is right here, that Google Sheets needs in order to put data into Google Sheets. This function right here, sorting an array, was a useful one I created, which simply allows me to sort a table of data that looks like this. Again, this doesn't look like a spreadsheet of data, but in reality, this is a column of data, this is a column data, this is one row, this is a column data, this is a column data, this is the second row. And this function right here would allow me to sort this list of data by the updated at column. And it was kind of fun. Again, I'm not a coder programmer, but it was kind of fun just playing around with this function to make it work until it was allow me to sort things the way I needed to in order to have the data ready for Google Sheets. And then finally, this is probably something that those of you who are using like no-code tools like Zapier or Integromat are probably more used to. I wanted to sync my data from Coda to Google Sheets every hour, sometimes every day. And in Google Apps Script, you can easily tell Google Apps Script how many times to run the sync so that your data would always stay updated in real time from my data in Coda to my table in Google Sheets. And it allows you to, I think, even sync it down to the minute level. So it's really flexible. And just to reiterate, Google Apps Script is completely free. So I can do all this stuff for free. And I think the limit's like 50,000 like syncs a month or something. So it's a pretty generous amount from Google. And I'll start wrapping things up here. This seemed like a really insurmountable task because I'm not a coder. I've never done scripting. I don't know JavaScript that well. And I realized from watching one or two, like literally 10-minute tutorials in Google Apps Script, I could build some small functions and get them to work first before I tackled the bigger problems of wanting to sync like an entire 1,000 row table in Coda to a 1,000 row sheet in Google Sheets. I made a bunch of mistakes as I was writing the script. So refactoring is a common word that you'll hear a lot, I guess, in the software world, which is thinking about how you can just reuse and not have like kind of really bad code, I suppose you could say, in your script. And so that was something I learned along the way. Is I was kind of repeating myself sometimes, and I just realized that's inefficient and wanted to make my script run faster. And finally, nonstop Googling. Google was ended up being my professor for the better part of like 2 or so months when I was learning how to write things like that sort array function. I mean, this function that I wrote right here, like I probably Googled 10 different articles until I figured this out. So that was one thing that I learned. I was just Googling nonstop. And I open sourced this script on my GitHub repo, so if anyone wants to use it, feel free to pull it from my link there. And I'm just going to wrap up with a few key takeaways for this session. Is number one is be skilled in workflows in addition to tools. I think when I talk to a lot of people who are new in their career and learning about data analysis and wanting to break into data, they ask me about what tools should I learn. I, of course, say Excel and Google Sheets. I think spreadsheets are amazing for learning about data. But when I get approached by students who say, well, I know Excel, I know Google Sheets, what's next? Do I learn SQL? Do I learn coding or whatever? I tell them those are all great if you want to specialize in database management or if you want to specialize in building websites. But I think where the biggest need for people and companies is workflows. So if you're using Zapier, if you want to learn Google Apps Script, this is how the workflows idea is how you move data from one app. Maybe it's Salesforce, maybe it's Google Sheets, maybe it's Coda, maybe it's Trello, maybe it's Jira. How do you move that from that application to another application and keeping things integrated in sync? I think these workflows is a much more important skill to learn, and it's really in high demand for companies who know, because there's so many apps out there, and companies are having a hard time connecting their apps together. So if you know how to glue these things together, you'll be in good shape. I mentioned this already, working through simple tutorials of Google Apps Script. YouTube, watch tutorials. This tutorial, actually, this is probably the first tutorial I looked at when I first looked at Google Apps Script. It's literally their intro tutorial on how to use Google Apps Script. And the only thing that the Apps Script does is, let me actually try to find out what it actually does. It's simple things like, this script, I think it creates a Google Doc for you, and then it sends you an email with a link to the Google Doc. That's all this script does, and it taught me a lot about how to use Google Apps Script just from doing that thing. Again, I've been teaching Excel, Google Sheets for years now, and when I see someone's resume that has familiarity with Excel, Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, or intermediate experience with Excel or Google Sheets, the main way I can decipher whether that person really understands Excel and Google Sheets is, do you understand VLOOKUPs, pivot tables, index match? Because if you have a solid understanding of those concepts, you're already in the 5% of people that understand how to use spreadsheets for the way they're intended to be used, which is connecting data sources together. So if you say you know Excel and Google Sheets, you should definitely understand VLOOKUPs and pivot tables and index match, for that matter, to be considered proficient in Excel, in my perspective. Just like I did with the Google Apps Script, break your problem down to small pieces. If you're working on your own company, or if you are working on a project at work, I would just work on the smallest piece of work you can figure out in that bigger project, and then hopefully that thing will add up to the final solution that you want to work on for the quarter or for the year. And the last thing is, you don't have to have a computer science or data science degree to do any of the things I just showed you today with Google Apps Script, with Google Sheets. Case in point, I majored in marketing in college, so no experience with data analysis, Excel, or programming. Just realized that by nature of my first job out of college as a financial analyst, I had to work with Excel and got thrown into the deep end. And so just learned it by trial by fire. And over time, I realized that this can really change. This skill, I realized, is transferable to any company I work at. And it really kind of changed my life once I learned to my talk. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. And also give Coda a try if you can.
Awesome. Well, that was really good. You dropped off just for a quick second there towards the end, but I think everyone got it. So everyone, if you do, you should see on the right-hand side of your screen a little raise hand button. If you want to go ahead and do that, that will let me know that you've got a question, you want to jump into it. Otherwise, of course, you can also throw it into anything you want to talk about into the live chat, and we'll grab it from there. I'll just kind of get the ball rolling. And some of the things you said, I think, really resonated with me. One, I was a political science person in undergrad, so as far from tech as you can get. So for those of you who aren't in tech or aren't in data and want to jump into it, I definitely agree with the trial by fire, jumping in and kind of, especially at smaller startups where you really you can't just ask someone to take care of it for you. You have to learn and sometimes have that opportunity, and it becomes worth it. But the things that resonated really is, figuring out that question for you, like the big problem was kind of insurmountable, but walk me through a little bit, maybe an example of like how you broke it down into small pieces. What was like that first thing you started with when you were looking at that big report that you had to do for Google, and then kind of like what the next step after that looked like to get to being able to do something a little bit bigger?
For the report at Google, the first thing I literally tried to do in VBA was just being able to select a cell in my Excel file. I can't tell you how magical it felt when, like, I mean, everyone knows when you're using Excel Google Sheets, you can click on cells and, the cursor highlights or whatever. But I remember the first time I learned how to select cells with VBA, I could literally tell the computer to select A1, then select C5, and then select D2. And then I would just play the script over and over again. I would just see my cursor jump from cell to cell without me using the mouse. And I was like, whoa, this is pretty cool. Like, I can just move the cursor around without using my mouse. And so for me, the first thing was just like, can I even select cells in my Excel file using the VBA script?
Nice. That's actually really cool. Yeah, the other thing that I think you brought up that I think really resonates with me, but also a lot of, it's funny, when we talked to data scientists, that problem that you mentioned, they use a different word for it. They talk about data engineering or data pipelines, but essentially that concept of you have stuff everywhere and they actually can't do their jobs. Like companies will hire a team of data scientists, and then they can't really do their jobs because their data is all over the place and no one's done the part of figuring out how to pull that stuff in. So yeah, I think that's something that I think we don't talk about often enough. I think when we talk about breaking into data, we talk about doing the cool tools, the sexy stuff, but we forget about all the other stuff. I mean, I don't know what your experience is now, because I assume a lot of what you do is you talk to companies. Like, what would you say, looking at what kind of like your experience for the last year or whatever, like what would you say is like their biggest like pain point when they come to you and they're like, hey, I want to solve these problems? Is it like a data pipeline issue, or is it more something else?
Well, I'll speak from two perspectives. From a Coda perspective, when I'm working with companies, the main problem is more around collaboration on their data. So it's not really like I have like these millions of rows of data. How do I organize it, sort it? It's more about I have a project with like 150 tasks. How do I make sure that my teammate in California, my teammate in Chicago are all aligned on what task needs to be worked on and how everything sync together. So it's up being about that, and it's more about like how do I set up these workflows so that when I update my task in one place, it also gets updated in this other place. So that's a little bit more about kind of like team culture and kind of workflow operations in a way. But outside of Coda, when I'm talking to people about or just thinking about Excel and the data problems that people have, to your point about data pipelines, the biggest problem is that I need to spend hours and hours of time cleaning up my data set. So it's getting rid of like a pesky dash or an extra trailing space or formatting my dates correctly. And for data scientists, I know that's a really big problem before they can even do any analysis. But even for regular analysts at companies, whether you work in product management, marketing, customer support, if you don't have a data engineer, the person that ends up doing all the cleaning of the data ends up being the marketing person, the operations person, because you get the pull of the data from the database and it's not formatted correctly yet. And so you, as the marketing person, the customer support, you have to do all the filtering and sorting and cleaning up the data in Excel. But in an ideal world, a data engineer will clean that up in the database before it even gets to Excel. So that's kind of why I think these skills are so in high demand for people who don't necessarily have a data background, is because you don't have a data engineer who can help you do all that formatting before it even hits your Excel file.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I was that person who, I was an operations guy at a startup, and we had some stuff in Salesforce, we had some stuff on a custom backend, and I wasn't able to do like a basic query, and so I had to always Slack these engineers and say, hey, can you get me a CSV for whatever problem it was I was looking at. But I mean, these people must have hated me because I would, they didn't work on my team. It was something that was super boring, and I would ask them all the time, "Can you get me this random one-off thing?" But in hindsight, that's like one of the things that is one of the bigger challenges, I think. And yeah, we're not data scientists, but it's something that, like, I love data because irrespective of where you're at, it's something that you're always doing. Now, here we go. Question from Mark. And then for everyone else, if you can obviously keep throwing things into the chat. If you'd like to actually physically ask your question and join us on stage, you're more than welcome to. Just go ahead and raise your hand or put it into the chat. But Al, can you read the question from Mark, or do you want me to read it off for you?
Sure, I can read it. So Mark asks, do you copy or sync data? If syncing data, how do you work through conflicting changes, especially when data is changing on both sides or from concurrent users? Yeah, this is basically the promise of Google Sheets, where you can update a Google Sheet in real time, and there's ways you can work with the conflict. In terms of my workflows, I'm not doing a two-way data sync. So that kind of, that's a much bigger engineering problem that many companies are trying to solve. And I'm not the person to solve it. So my syncing is more one way. So I want to keep my Google Sheets updated based on what's in my Salesforce or what's in my Coda table or what's in my Trello. So it's a one way data sync. And so it's, that's kind of my answer to that. I'm not trying to do a two-way sync. If I need that kind of syncing, then I will try my best to have both parties work in the same file, which is what real-time collaborative tools like Google Sheets, Google Docs are meant for.
That is actually a really good question. And yeah, that's like one of once it becomes two-sided, that's a different sort of conversation in terms of just complexity. But it is super important because you need one source of truth. At least in my experience, that's the biggest challenge that companies face. And then last question from me before, if anyone else has any questions, jump in. Otherwise, we'll break off into some tables here. But talk about the difference a little bit in terms of, like, you've worked at huge companies like Google, and now you're at Coda, which is not a small company, but still kind of growth stage. What's the difference like for someone on your end of things?
The biggest thing, I think, is when I was at a big company at Google, I had more leeway to kind of learn on my own and not be worried, I suppose, about making mistakes. I know that sounds kind of weird, but when I was at Google, like, you spend like a few weeks when you first start just like doing onboarding training, and you have a learning budget too. You have like some companies do this as well, but I think when you're at a big company, it's a little easier to get lost, and for better or worse, it also gives you an opportunity to learn things on your own that you can either enrich yourself with or make help you with your job. While at Coda, which is a smaller company, we're like 100 or so people, I'm learning, but at the same time, what I'm learning is like doing things for my job. So I can't just break away for like half a day or a week and take a class. It's like, I kind of like it because if I want to learn how to do, if I want to learn how to do content marketing really well, I just do it. I'm not really like taking a class and then like applying it. So I think I'm just a little more, I have experience, so I don't feel like I need to take classes, to learn how to do stuff. I guess scrappy enough where I can just like, if I want to do something, I'll just do it and make mistakes. Great. If make mistakes, that's not great, but I'll learn from them faster. And my team knows that I'm experimenting.
Yeah. Classic startup answer.
Yeah.
Those of us who work in startups, you love it because everything you do is super impactful, and to your point, you just do it. And as long as nothing too badly breaks, you learn from it and you move on and you get better. So with that, I'm gonna end it here. We'll both be hanging out in the lounge at some of the tables. Feel free to come and say hello. With that, definitely. We'll be sending everyone the recording from this talk. So everyone who's watching from YouTube, you obviously have that as well. And you should also on Eventbrite have the deck as well. So you guys can obviously go back and reference that. If you enjoy this, please appreciate definitely giving us a like on LinkedIn or YouTube or your platform of choice. But all those little things always help us. And then definitely come back next week because we've got some more cool stuff. Always, really good, practitioners do this kind of stuff every single day, and they're here to help you. So take advantage, ask questions, learn, and then hopefully we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.